My talk is called So You Want to Be a Socially Conscious Studio, How to Not Fuck It Up in 20 Minutes or Less. Okay, so my boss has said kind of forcefully that I should introduce myself and get used to sort of giving myself positive feedback and being kind to myself and proud of the work I do. So I'm Limpho Moeti. I'm the producer and business developer for a game studio in South Africa called Nyamakop. I've previously worked at another studio called Free Lives, who made Broforce and Gorn. And I was the deputy festival director for an independent gaming and digital art festival here in Cape Town called Playtopia, which sadly will not be happening this year due to broadly gestures and everything. So let's jump into this talk of socially about how you can create a socially conscious studio and sort of what do I even mean by this? If I can get there we go, and talk about sort of what the problem is. So a big thing is before I can even get into sort of the problems of being a marginalized person within game development, I just quickly want to talk about why I'm going to be using the phrase untapped people or untapped person for the rest of this talk, right? And the first thing is that I really want to change the way we think about marginalization, and that what it does is marginalized has this connotation to negativity. You're on the margins, you're not properly seen, but also this connotation of learned helplessness. And what that means is that sort of if you're an untapped person, as I will now say, that you've been conditioned to expect sort of suffering and pain or discomfort without a way to escape it, right? Which means that it's harder for you to really put yourself out there, put yourself forward, speak up for yourself. And this usually happens because there's a lot of implicit or explicit things that you will have heard, such as you're not important, your ideas or existence is divisive, or as there's that great tweet says, in gaming, there is white or political, there is straight or political, there is male or political. And sort of those kinds of experiences really make it very difficult to feel comfortable in yourself. And so with untapped people, I want to remind everyone that marginalized people have huge amounts of potential and skill and talent. And so rather than seeing us marginalized and below others in need of help up, we should be seen as the potential that we have and see ourselves joyfully and excitedly and sort of respected. And so that's why I'll be using that term today. Let's see. I think I just also, yeah, highlighting the skills. I'm not very good at using PowerPoints because I hate them. So that's why I'll be using the term untapped people. So now the problem is that there are very few untapped people in game development, and there are a host of reasons as to why this is. Workplaces can oftentimes, either intentionally or unintentionally, most of the time unintentionally, be very hostile work environment for untapped people. Um, Oftentimes you'd be the only untapped person of your demographic within a company, whether that means you're the only person of color or only woman or only queer person. It can be quite difficult to exist in those spaces when you feel like there aren't other people like you who can understand your experiences. Secondly, you also have a lack of proper mentorship, which really means mentorships that not only help you grow your skills as a developer or a producer, but also one that takes into account the experiences that you've had and how that may affect the soft skills that are necessary to do well in this kind of industry and helping grow that and helping grow you in places where you are weak versus seeing you only as those weaknesses. I know people who've had experiences where they've been the only untapped person in a studio and noticed that oftentimes their mistakes were held against them versus people in a dominant group whose mistakes were seen as just that, a mistake, something that they can learn from and grow. And so that kind of thing really affects the amount of untapped people you'd have in your studio. There's also a lack of understanding the experiences and understanding the unique difficulties untapped people have, both within the creative industry and other industries. For some, that may be structural issues. For others, it may be issues in terms of how they're treated and how to make an environment more comfortable. There are various ways, lacks of understanding that ultimately push people out of game development. And finally, there is a lack of opportunities. It's very difficult to gain opportunities within this industry. And I think that needs to change, because it's not that untapped people don't have the skills or the ability, but sometimes there aren't the people who want to give them the space and the training, or who want to just give them the opportunity to do something they love. Or they may not have the ability, particularly in South Africa, to just start their own studios because of a lot of structural inequality within our countries, and how difficult starting a business is, and how risky starting game development is. So on an individual level, we also have to look at, I'm doing my notes on my phone because I have a laptop. I played myself. I should have gotten that second screen. So what I want to do is talk about what things can an individual do, both on an individual level and a structural level, that can make things better. And the answer is, you got to do a lot of work as a human being. And that work includes following socially conscious people from untapped demographics and untapped groups on social media as much as you can. It means reading books, articles, Twitter threads, Instagram posts, tweets, memes, anything you can find about privilege, inequality, and the effects of marginalization, and then keeping those in your mind and starting to follow through on the advice. The other thing that you can also do is do the work of do the emotional labor of learning without burdening a person in an untapped group, because oftentimes that takes a lot of work for us and can make us quite uncomfortable to feel as though we not only have to do our jobs, but now we also have to teach other people how to sometimes treat us with basic respect, even if it's unintentional. So as much as you can, do the work without involving that particular untapped person in your studio. Another important thing is, don't be defensive. This is like one of the most important pieces of advice. And I can understand how difficult it is, right? An important thing to remember is that you will, and we all do, get things wrong. You will make a mistake. You will fuck up. That's okay. It happens to the best of us. But the way to resolve that is firstly to listen and understand why someone may be upset at a thing you've done or said. It's to take a step back and really internalize it and think about it before responding. It is to sincerely apologize, and not the, oh, I'm sorry you were upset, or I'm sorry you were offended, but rather the, I'm sorry I hurt you, and try and be better. And don't feel guilty. If you do, you should talk to another person about it who's not the untapped person in question. I mean, it's a bit, I put it a bit rough in my notes that your guilt is wasting everyone's time, but to a degree it is, because the ultimate consequence of that is that the untapped person ends up doing labor to comfort you and to make you feel better. So you end up centering yourself in a situation that could be a learning opportunity, or about how actions may be bad towards specific untapped people. And realize that making this kind of mistake doesn't make you a bad person. It doesn't make you evil. It doesn't make us think you're being malicious, but rather that you're someone who still needs to grow and learn, as all of us do. Another thing that I think is important is really talking about how things work on a structural level. So you've done all this work, this hard work, you've leveled up your wokeness. And so the question becomes, how do you change a culture within a company? And it's also about understanding having a growth mindset versus a fixed mindset. So what that means is that there's a mindset that people come to you and can't necessarily grow or change beyond how they are already, versus, which ultimately works out oftentimes for people from untapped groups, is that it works out to feel as though they need to prove their worth and prove they can do everything and kind of do all the work and learning by themselves. Or you have a growth mentality, and it is very much applied differently. Or you have a growth mentality, which means that you believe and you can see someone's potential and the abilities that they currently have and grow those, and areas where they may be weak or struggle with specific things, and being able to see how you can grow and help them become better over time at specific tasks, right? And oftentimes we are treated as though our abilities are fixed and that we can't grow further, versus the ability to grow seen in those who aren't from untapped demographics. And I think that's a very important thing to keep in mind. And it can be quite unconscious and easy to not realize that. Also, an important thing to realize with the growth versus fixed mindset is that there is a level where we also have to understand that people with untapped potential aren't always going to be on a lower rung. That oftentimes people with untapped potential can be as good as, or sometimes better than people within a dominant group, such as straight people or white people or men. But there needs to be that opportunity to allow them to grow and to also show their worth. And so on an individual level, beyond just knowing what kind of mindset to have, which is growth mindset, you also need to take action to change the culture or to maintain a specific value and set of culture within your company. This includes taking microaggressions seriously. I mean, ultimately, they are just small things that most people don't intend. But for a person from an untapped group, it is oftentimes something they've heard over and over again and happens consistently, which creates a space that makes them feel uncomfortable and unheard and not willing to speak up and talk. So if someone does come to you with a microaggression, it doesn't mean you have to fire them or go to HR. It just means taking it seriously and ensuring that those kinds of microaggressions do not happen consistently. If you're in a studio like this and you want to make your culture better, if you see something problematic, say something. And say something when the untapped person isn't there. Take the person who said something problematic aside and speak to them, or as we would say, call them in, and sort of come from a place of compassion to feel as though this person may not know why they've done something is problematic, but it can be quite useful and takes a lot of burden and pressure off the untapped person to do the labor of like, hey, please don't say these kinds of things to me. Also, be willing to mentor untapped people. With mentorships, this is incredibly vital. It means actively growing the strengths of untapped people, to strive them to help them with their weaknesses, and to hype them up, to make them aware, not just make them aware rather, but to use positive reinforcement to help grow themselves so that they too can have the confidence of a mediocre white man. Really, it's all us untapped people want, because it can really help push us forward, make us grab opportunities we usually wouldn't, speak up about things, voice our ideas, and feel comfortable to do that within a work environment. Another important thing is we must acknowledge and value the soft skills that oftentimes people from untapped groups have and how vital they can be with an industry. A great example of that is myself. One of my biggest skills beyond giving incredible talks is business development, because I have those skills of making people feel comfortable, opening up, and friendly, and sort of really connecting with people. And that was often a skill that's not valued within my country, which feels very backwards. But now I'm at a studio that values that and helps me grow those skills and use them to become an effective business manager, and also helps me on other sides on things where I may be slightly weaker, such as, for example, running my calendar properly and making sure I'm on time to talks, because that is a weakness I have, but it's important as a producer to grow that skill and to learn from that. And being in a place where they're actively giving you constructive feedback and positive reinforcement, it's easier to grow and then become your best self. I have to keep unlocking my phone for my notes. The other thing that's really important as well is, like I said, praising the work of untapped people. And if it's not like consistently praising them, it's just acknowledging that work and acknowledging and valuing and showing the appreciation for their contributions to a project or to the work that's being done. I think that's vitally important. One of the big things that's incredibly important, and so important, I gave it its own slide. Oh, sorry, beyond providing opportunities and like giving tips to how to succeed. And this is difficult because you've got to thread the needle between being helpful but not being patronizing, which can be very difficult, understandably. One of the biggest things that you need to be able to do, especially if you have one untapped person, is to try and avoid tokenism as much as possible. It is both harmful to the marginalized person, to the untapped person, and it's also harmful to your studio and the culture at large and becoming socially conscious, right? It's incredibly damaging because it boils the untapped person down to their identity and not their skills. It puts pressure on the untapped person to be a representative of their entire demographic, which honestly we hate for various reasons, which is that we're not a spokesperson for an entire demographic. And that idea feels as though there is one monolithic way to be a specific kind of untapped demographic, or there's one specific idea that we all believe in as an untapped group. And that's harmful because we are all individuals and disagree with each other about various things. So it's important not to create a space that does not do that. Finally, you put an untapped person in a position to have the same exhausting conversations over and over and over again. Seriously, sometimes, for example, I'll use myself as an example. Sometimes I just want to talk about K-pop and Batman and Doctor Who, and not whether or not someone can use the N-word if it's in a rap song or not. It's a boring conversation. I've had it 15 times. The answer most likely is no, you'll probably make someone feel uncomfortable. So, just sort of being aware of that is hugely important. Secondly, it creates a situation where you make the untapped first person feel as that they are the one true untapped person. So it oftentimes, if we're the only ones, we feel like we only have so many chances to speak up about problematic things. I always joke that it's 5 times a year can I talk about a company doing something problematic before you become the Debbie Downer, before it becomes uncomfortable for everyone and you feel that you're constantly fighting against something that should be obvious and sometimes isn't, and you don't want to put people in that position because ultimately it makes it hostile and makes it hard to build relationships with people within a company because you're always seen as the one who's raining on everyone's parade, which sometimes you're not. And it's exhausting. It takes energy that could be used into bettering our skills for the benefit of the company or doing the work that we are paid to do, right? And ultimately, it makes your office unsafe. So in conclusion, I ran through this very quickly. Look, it can be ultimately very difficult, but it is deeply rewarding, not just because it's the moral and ethical thing to do, but because we know, and multiple studies have shown, how beneficial it is to have a company that has various different viewpoints and ideas and people from various backgrounds. And moreover, the reality is the tide is turning. We are becoming a society that's becoming more aware and understanding of different viewpoints, a society that is hungry for stories from different viewpoints. We can see that with, for example, an African show on Netflix, Queen Sono, being #1 in the United States, with how well Black Panther has done, that people are hungry for story from diverse points of view. And if you really want to be able to tap into that, you must do your best to be a socially conscious studio. We constantly talk about creating safe spaces and safe working environments for untapped people. But oftentimes, as an untapped person, you feel distrustful and you take it with a pinch of salt because everybody's happy to talk the talk, but not walk the walk of doing the hard work. But if you're willing to do the hard work, get ready. We probably won't give you a cookie, but you'll get incredible work out of us. You'll have incredible people, talented people at their full potential for your company making awesome stuff. Plus, you won't get canceled on Twitter. And who doesn't want to do that, right? It'll make your life so much easier. Thank you very much. I'm Limpho Moeti from Nyamakop. There's my Twitter handle. Ask me your questions. I'm ready for you. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Very, very nice. And I gotta say, I also love your logo there with the brain and the heart together. It's very, very telling.
Cool. Thank you. The founder of one of the co-founders of the company, I think it was Ben and Sugar, created the logo. But I'll say I did it because I'm finally in a place in a company that allows me to take all the ideas from men versus men taking the ideas from women. So thank you so much. I'm a great designer.
Good.